This show is going to be about something really tough to sort of put in a bottle. But there's a lot of people researching this, and a lot of people, like active journalists out there like Graham Hancock, and a lot of humans on Earth that are following guys like that and trying to do your own research. Now, I have options when I record these shows. Do I go and learn a bunch of, geeky statistics and then make a big statistics show or a factual show, quote-unquote factual show? And that's typically not my style, right? My style is to get at the why do we give a shit level of this entire discussion. Why would it matter? Because I think that as we don't develop purpose in life, we tend to create it. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I think that's what life is about, is finding your purpose, right? My major reason for this episode, I think, is, there's certain things in life when you form a particular thought over and over and over in your mind, and it never quite sits well with you. But you accept it because no one else seems to be having a problem with it. As time passes, you simply get frustrated with anything that's negative, especially as you make your life positive. So, it's one of these things of, if everyone in the world broadcast speaks, then being bullshitted and double-speaked and PC'd and lied to and mind-programmed will just seem normal. But the second we all start talking normal, and stop talking like politicians, stop talking like reporters, then anyone who does talk like that sticks out like a sore thumb, right? Well, the same goes true with the way that you think about any subject matter whatsoever. If a thought doesn't flow through you with absolute unity and clarity, then that thought is a frontier. It is a jagged edge on a sculpture of thought that needs to be honed and refined. And I tell you, one of the things that is so muddy, it's even muddy before you get into conspiracies of the history of the world being extremely tampered with, if not completely forged, is the evolution of man. And I don't mean from necessarily the fish up. I did an episode on that. That's episode 2. If you want to know my thoughts about that. We are going to get into a few evolutionary concepts in this conversation. But this whole episode is going to be sort of about the origins of man. And there's I think two dimensions of the actual existence of men. So there's two conversations we have to have at the same time. One is the mortal coil that we carry around, the evolution of what these bodies look like and their genetic abilities to mutate, to be different. You look different than me. And then there's the consciousness of man that symbiotically attaches to this body that has its own evolutionary chart. Maybe. It seems like it does. It could be an illusion created by the fact that we have bodies that aren't well equipped to do anything special. One doesn't need to look further than, say, a clarinet as attached to a bagpipe. I mean, a clarinet is compared to a bagpipe, right? You have two instruments that are driven by wind. They go through, I'm assuming there's some sort of reed in the bagpipe. I've never, ever put one up to my mouth or held one. But you have two instruments that are run off of an invisible force called wind and pressure. Now, we know that to operate it, we put wind into these two instruments and we hear beautiful resonating sounds, hopefully, right? Unless I'm playing it. But you wouldn't say, if the observable eye from the Middle Ages was the apex of knowledge in the world, you would say, well, what am I doing? What really exists to make this instrument go? It seems as if I just put my mouth on it and flex my lungs, this thing magically makes noise. It's an invisible force that's making it happen. And that's sort of a better analogy than I've ever given on the show for what I believe consciousness does to the mortal coil. But I want to go back. I did an episode I'm going to flush because it just did not come out right. I'm going to take a look at it and see. But this is going to be a little bit more of a a bigger, more broader focused thing. So it's going to seem a little bit esoteric on thought, but hopefully, if the thought I'm about to describe to you has frustrated you your whole life, this episode should be right up your alley, even if I don't hit, the nail on the head, essentially, right? And that is the thought of when man, at least I'll put it this way, when I think back to all of the existing theories of the beginning of man, whether it be an evolutionary thought chain, whether it be a God, divine creation thought chain, or some weird hybrid of alien intervention splicing, which sort of combines everything together, right? It starts to get muddy in my brain, and it starts to get frustrating that thought isn't answered, which is sort of like anything. My other videos about the and I don't know if I'm ever going to put it out, so just know there was one in the queue. It's all about sort of the meaning of life. But when I go back and I think about where the hell we came from, it just feels like it's almost as if I can feel that what I have been told is full of lies. But that feeling doesn't have any substance or real validity because it's only a feeling. And, your Christians might say, well, of course, because your Christians might say, well, of course, you're off believing evolution and God has told you it's creationism. I probably have pound for pound an equal rejection of just a blatant creationism from God than I do for evolution. It's unsettling, it's strange, and it has nothing to do with the ego either. It just has to do with that feeling. I play a trick, and it just developed over time, that if you ever meet someone who's a creep, a jerk, not like the internet creeps, but the old-fashioned guy's just a jerk, whatever, or you suspect someone is, or someone behaved badly in front of you according to your standards, and you think that they may have crossed lines, and maybe they do that all the time, right? I've noticed that if I were to describe them out loud the way I believe them to be or suspect them to believe, and I use derogatory words that match the behavior, one of two things will occur in my heart, in my chest, in my gut. I will either get a cool sensation that is exactly who they are, or I will get a rejecting sensation in my chest that says you're wrong. That's the perception you have of them, but you're wrong. And I think that that's been something that I've felt my entire life, and it's not just towards people. I just give you the people analogy so you can get it. But there's this interesting algorithm of truth in the universe, in that when you think truth, you have this beautiful, beautiful feeling. Now, it could be the truth is more of a metaphorical thing for your Christians and your people who are religious. They're thinking thoughts of things that that completely contradict each other, right? So you have Group A Christians, which believe one thing, and Group B Christians that believe another thing. They're both sitting there potentially in some euphoric state, believing in opposite stories. But maybe the metaphor and the overall meaning of what they're believing is true. Not that Jesus was real, but the way to reach God is through being peaceful and divine and forgiving. And even if we don't achieve those standards, we still strive for them, So when I use that mechanism of thought, which I'm not saying it's a scientific absolute of truth, and that but I do believe that truth is something in us, and I think that the reason why people get really angry at truth, especially as conspiracies reveal that their previous thoughts were not true, is that some people, there's something called the Stockholm Syndrome, and I'm probably going to do an episode completely about the Stockholm Syndrome at one point. I wrote an article on onepagenews.com called The Abomination, and it's just all about everyone who was stuck in that guy from the very beginning. But what people end up doing is the Stockholm Syndrome, as clinically defined, is essentially a person who is a captive of another person falling in love with their captor because they really just don't have any other choice. It's a defense mechanism to wake up in hell every single day. With truth, as we try to attain it, as it relates to especially evolution and religious doctrine, is that we're trying to know the truth. Because the truth is a path of least resistance when you get it, when you think it, when you feel it. But it's hard to get sometimes, I think that's why mathematicians and nerds have the gene where they get off to very left brain concepts executing. Because to them, it is divine truth. Mathematics is divine truth. There's no other way to look at it. Whatever made the universe, whether or not we're in a computer simulation or in the palm of God's hand, 1 + 1 = 2 in this dimension of reality, right? And so for some people, that's a euphoric dopamine drop in their brain. But the thing that Graham Hancock gets into that I want to really get into is essentially the origins of man. As you study history, you go through all these different phases of kind of the Kubler-Ross suite of thoughts, the anger, or was it denial, anger, and acceptance, and that person's got 4 or 5 other theories in there, but or other stages, but those are the main ones. It's sort of how you go through the realization that history has been unbelievably revised. What's weird about it is we have this illusion that we've recorded it, that through archaeology we've recorded it. And Egypt alone, the country of Egypt, has utterly proven in the last, I think, 2 decades that they aren't the slightest bit interested in true history of their own people, because they didn't build the pyramids. They didn't build the pyramids at all. Just look at the people on the freaking walls. They're African people. Look at King Tut's bust. It's an African person. If there's anything that makes you understand that the King Tut bust is real, is that it has completely and utterly African geometry on it. And no white guy and no Arab guy would craft something out of their racial pool if they had the choice to revise it. The whole planet right now is I don't know, so utterly terrified of the African. It's crazy. I don't know where that comes from, but Graham Hancock has been doing all kinds of expeditions, and the guy has actually picked the most amazingly beautiful area to create an expedition, because he will, if he lived to be 150, he will only scratch the surface of the history of man. And he's doing a brilliant job at it, from, going through all of the low-hanging fruit of the Egyptian pyramids, the Aztec pyramids, but he's also diving off the coast of Japan. He's studying Tibetan temples and Ethiopian temples, and it is really phenomenal what the guy's been putting together. And I think that I want to go before that thought. Part of it has to do with that whole thing, if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. If you don't know where you've been, sort of thing. I said this exact analogy in the other episode. In case I release it, there'll be some plagiarism in there. The big question is, why does it matter that we know this information? And I think that the real answer in this particular case is actually profound, and it is that we and this is probably what the analogy meant a long time ago, but it sort of defines your potential. If you found yourself a ghetto kid somewhere in the world, regardless of what race and what continent you live on, and you don't have any money, and your parents don't have any money, and they never have, and you don't feel smart, that kind of thing, but you want to be, and you want to be full of the truth. Hopefully the internet's making y'all geniuses, because there's no excuse why it shouldn't. And you learned that you're a descendant of a race that has been masterful engineers. Perhaps you travel to Atlantis, somewhere in a bubble underneath the Atlantic Ocean, and I march you in that room and I go, dudette, these are your people. Just take a look around, because as you see all the elven craftsmanship of this unbelievable Atlantic city, this is your people. They built all this, man. We have listeners from Scotland. Man, what a cool place to be from if you want to look at your history. And I'm sure it's been revised and dumbed down by British people, but the idea is, Scottish Freemasons that, you don't have to like them, but there's some pretty amazing genetics that moved into that area. The 5 kings, or the 6 kings, right? The Vikings who settled in Europe and formed Europe potentially. We don't know. We don't know where the hell we came from. Okay, so here's the cleansing mechanism for whoever wants to revise history to do it in a really profound fashion. When you have history of the world that goes on for tens of thousands of years, and there is no real deep permanent means to record that history, then you can make up anything you want. Whatever you find, you can take the fanciful stories that shoot into your brain and just make them true. I personally have, let me put it this way. I'll say it this way. The mud tablets of Sumeria, with this etched writing, there's tens of thousands of them, right? We have found poetry. We have found, ledgers of what people purchased and how much they paid. We found recipes for cures, for beers, for how to rotate crops to, feed the people throughout the year, right? Because they're mud tablets, they can't be carbon dated. And so, even though they might be real, it wouldn't be terribly difficult to forge those. And that bothers me. I don't have any distinct feeling that they're forged either way. I've never seen one personally in any museums that I'm aware of. But it's a challenge. And that's one of the oldest recorded pieces of modern history that we have. It's like 4500 BC, right? Now, I have to assume that writing for any culture, especially the way that they had so efficiently done it, according to these tablets, it's a late evolution in a civilized being, in a civilized race. And so I feel like whatever happened way before any of the tablets we've ever found, any of the hieroglyphs we've ever found, that these are the last ones to survive. And it might be, take for instance the Egyptians. Maybe they didn't realize how to cut their words into stone for 10,000 years. Maybe every time they scribed it was on, papyrus, or it was in the sand, or it wasn't even written down, it was just spoken. So when you have that limitation of recording and preserving history, then where we believe things to begin is up for grabs. Now with the Egyptians and with the Sumerians, you have this interesting thing. Obviously, they did not have any calendars related to this fictitious person named Jesus. So their history, right? Their history doesn't record itself as 4500 BC. We simply try to do this thing called carbon dating to make it accurate to us. And the level of contingency for carbon dating is extremely high. I've had people try to argue in the comments about how unbelievably certified carbon dating is, and in fact just going into their typical diarrhea of the brain, calling everybody in the threads names and stuff. And the second I try to pull them out into disciplines and I say, give me patina carbon dating on rock surfaces, give me rock carbon dating, give me biomatter carbon dating, give me fossilization carbon dating, break it down for me, genius, so that you can prove to us you have the vocational wherewithal to be judging all of us in these threads. They just poof and disappear, right? So I'm not coming to you with no knowledge in this. I'm not also remotely an expert in it. But think about it. One of the most famous relics of the Sumerian times, and again, this could all be a bunch of disinformation. This could be a lie. This could be some historian guy trying to make a buck. But I don't know anyone who's made any money from the thing I'm about to say, but maybe someone did. But there's a coin that resembles the Statue of Liberty, which has been said to be Queen Semiramis. It's a Babylonian coin. It is often dated 4500 BC. Who knows, right? You can't carbon date a coin. You can't. And so if you had the coin in the palm of a hand of a human being, and it's pressed into the skin of the palm, and we carbon date that palm, which has biomatter signature, which is where you can get the radioactive carbon dating to remotely have a theory that works, then perhaps you could say that coin was of the age of the palm of the hand, right? But now think about that. Let's just give them their 4500 BC craftsmanship capabilities. According to, again, I think, BS recorded history, they put the pyramids built around 3200 BC, which, again, if you read the history of all the temples and all of the dynasties, as Graham Hancock has pointed out several times, they date their own pharaohs back 36,000 years. Okay, that's pre-Ice Age, right? And consequently, they managed to live through the Ice Age as well and continue to record history and build things. So, again, I think man has never been in an Ice Age. The Ice Age idea might simply be a complete hoax to create almost a time barrier in the brain to keep us from going back, right? Now, with this coin, let's just say it's 4500 BC. All right. It's a coin. It's a minted coin. I don't know what the hell it's made out of. I don't know if it's made out of nickel or silver. It's silver in color, right? It's got a grayish reflective color. And it exists. So somebody came up with this idea that we have this precious metal that we're going to trade back and forth. Obviously, it was like maybe weighing nuggets, unrefined nuggets, and then maybe somebody got the crazy idea to melt it, and then they realized they could forge it into forms, and then, could take less than 100 years for the brain. Look what we did with the Wright brothers got their patent for airplanes in 1907, having flown in 1904, but it's 2016, and now we can do supersonic, right? We can fight wars and destroy entire nations with planes. Less than, a little over 100 years later. Less than 100 years later, we were doing it, right? So it could be that as soon as someone melts a mineral, that the exponential understanding of how to mint that into a coin goes really quickly. But they got to a point where they got this raw material, they melted it, and they managed to maybe make pieces of 8, a big disc, and you can break it in half and keep breaking it like a pie slice, right? And then someone thought, well, I want to, maybe, again, it just melts in a way that looks like there's a surface to it. You realize there's contouring. Maybe people were doing etching in stone way before this coin was minted, which makes sense. And someone had a religious deity, the first real Mary archetype, that we know of, which is Queen Semiramis, right? And someone takes this, what looks like, several hundreds of years of evolution of this woman with a 7-spike crown holding the reed of the people, the tyrannical reed of the people, I control all you, and made a coin out of it. There's a tremendous amount of history that's unaccounted for when just showing you a coin and saying it was made in 4500 BC. And so, again, this is where I think that there are giant voids in our kind of grade school, middle school, high school education about history. And you go to the Barnes & Noble, right? You go to any bookstore that you have. And what they think is profound is to take, ridiculous indoctrinated history and, just kind of wiggle a thread in the sweater. And it's like, this whole book's about a wiggle and a thread in a sweater. Oh my God, did you realize that King Tut might have had red hair? And there'd be a whole book on King Tut having red hair or something, right? Stupid. Nothing profound, because the publishers are completely part of the cabal. How do you go about this conversation? Well, we could go infinitely back to, say, evolution's explanation of things. I think evolution has really taken some seriously just hits lately, which is the something from nothing theory, which, again, scientists will sit there and say, well, it happens, man. Randomness just happens. And, if randomness happens on a galactic or interstellar or interdimensional or universe level, then eventually you do get life. Just everything that could possibly happen will happen, and you just have to be patient. Okay. I talked to a friend of mine who is a genius and not the slightest bit religious. Not a huge... Well, we got into the discussion of evolution. And we really got into the discussion of Kurzweil and his whole thing, believing in the bag of chemicals theory, which is evolution. Talk about Ray Kurzweil, who a friend of mine just had over for dinner, and I guess he doesn't eat dinner. I guess he eats 200 plus pills a day. He believes he's going to live forever. All opinions of him is that he looks 20 years older than he does because he's just aging horribly trying to eat these pills. But someone has convinced him that if he takes these several hundred pills a day that he'll never age and he's going to get younger. And it's like, they're all like, dude, he looks like he's on his death's doorstep. So Ray, if you can hear me, go eat a steak, would you? But my buddy, he was like saying, the thing that scientists have been trying to do for over 100 years is a couple things. One, restart a human brain with the memories of the person who died. So you die and you do the old Frankenstein, electrically stimulate the brain, almost like a defibrillator for the brain. Now what's really gooey and gross and weird is that they have done a head transplant successfully. They've done it. And how do we know they've done it? Because I think Japan said they're going to do it, which means they've been doing it for a long time. If you don't believe that places like Jekyll Island, or what is it? Maybe I got that name wrong. Jekyll Island's where they did the Federal Reserve thing. Well, there's what's it, the island off New York, I think, or something like that. When you guys are going to start yelling at the screen here, I'll try to put it up there. But the island that has been used proverbially to create, spider monkeys or spider goats and weird shit. I could tell you that somewhere in the world, some crazy bunch of weirdos has created every single spliced human being that could exist. It's been done. And it's probably continuing to this day. But I don't want to get too sidetracked there. But he was saying, look, no one's been able to shock the brain back into consciousness or to consciousness, and no one's been able to create a true amino acid, enzyme, nucleic acid that's ready for implant out of random matter. That hasn't happened yet. And, I guess you could split hair and say we're just not there yet. But I think that in machines, we could create infinite randomness pretty damn fast, with saying we're going to put the biomatter in that the stuff is made out of, the atomic matter it's made out of, we're going to shock the shit out of it and see if something comes from nothing. In my world, the reason why you don't have anything becoming alive, you might get something to crystallize and pat yourself on the back. You might even get a red blood cell to divide, but that's not consciousness. That's just an almost mechanical crystallization, right? Crystals grow in unbelievably gorgeous shapes, right? Under extreme pressure sometimes, and other times just grows in the dish by itself, right? It's just an atomic pattern that Stephen Wolfram keeps talking about. Quite frankly, crystals are not life because they are too uniform. So evolution, to start the conversation, I think is perhaps not the right place, unless we want to say the following. We keep being told, because we only live a tiny amount of years, right? We're living, 80 to 100 years? If you get any more than that, you're really lucky. Any less than that, I'm very sorry you got sick. But we don't have the observable, what I want to say. We don't live long enough to observe change in several areas of reality, right? Now, if you live next to a shoreline, like maybe Mavericks up there in the Bay Area, or Zuma Beach down here in LA, and you have a house that, your writing study overlooks a cliff, and you manage to pull off 40 years staring at that same cliff. In the 40 years of your lifetime, because of an eroding coastline due to most likely ocean waves and storms and things, you may notice in your mind's eye, if there isn't like a landslide or something that makes it obvious, the evolution of a coastline. Now, if you move to Havasu, Arizona, and Havasu Lake, which is a beautiful place, might I add, very warm. It's a man-made lake. It's a big dam at the south end. It's an absolute fabulous place to go, man. Just know you're going to be warm, but it's a dry heat. But let's say you have a house that overlooks sort of there's a lot of real landscape there. It's a lot of expanding Earth evidence, as a matter of fact, the slanted slates of Earth. But you were to just look at one of the coves there, and you live there 50 years. You probably will not notice a single change unless one of the goats that actually climbs up on the rocks knocks something over, right? I think you understand where I'm going with this, which is that we don't see each other enough to see perhaps much more rapid change. I said in an episode a long time ago, and I still believe this is true, that we actually evolve due to consciousness, like epigenetics says, with de Lamarck's invention, discovery, within our lifetimes. You've seen this 100 times, and I know you're not ready to accept it. Some of you aren't. Some of you are going to be like, oh yeah, totally. And that is that we evolve within our lifetime, the outer shell of our body. What am I talking about? Some of you know those couples that are utterly in love, and I mean crazy in love, and they've never not been in love. They don't argue. They have beautiful kids. They just are one. And I think this happens when they start out with tribes that are fairly similar in design, but there's something crazy that happens in that they start looking alike. Depending on how early and how idealistic they are when they get together. You know, if they start dating at 16 and you see them at 30, 40, 50, you can barely tell them apart. Now, there's contributing factors to that someone might choose to buy clothing at the same place. They start unifying their colors. They start wearing the same glasses, hairdos. Maybe they even want to look complementary to each other without consciously realizing it, right? There's all these photographs on the web of people that look like their pets. Some of you might say, well, they buy pets to look like them. But I want to say that I believe that within a lifespan of a human being, 80 to 100 years, that if you are in tune with someone and you feel one with someone, that this sort of thing can happen within your lifetime. The desire for the giraffe to eat something really high in the vista of food could allow them to elongate their necks within a few generations, or maybe even a single generation, right? Look at the African women that put the doodads on the loops on their throats, and they lift their throats so high they can't really support their necks if they don't have the junk underneath their chin. I remember seeing that as a kid, and I was so disturbed. To this day, I do not know how their vertebrae allows it, because they've created some of these women. I don't know if it's been photoshopped or something like that, but this was in the 70s, man. But some of these women had necks that I swear to God, they're like 10 inches long. Or even longer. And I just wonder how if the vertebrae gives out, right, and it doesn't join the bones together, then you have a nervous system that goes right up there, and it's going right to your brain stem. And man, you sever that, you are dead. So I don't know how these women do it, but the body adapts. It's interesting, right? So when history is not recorded, it's sort of like a blank canvas for anyone who cares to try and record it. And I think that you might have, a group of people that would start out, it seems to me like, you give me your thoughts, but it seems to me like when something becomes available in terms of a technology, it's typically always created by a beautiful, truthful, good-spirited thinker. And then your evil bastards come around. The people that want to short circuit life, right? They're like, hey, I don't want to work really hard. I don't really care about integrity. I don't have any sympathy or empathy for my fellow man. I just want to get what I want and get it. Check it off that list so I can be emotionally happy, right? So I feel like if history was a blank canvas, you might have some people rush in like us that are like, hey, man, let's really figure out what happened here. At that point, we have a level of technology that we have acquired that allows us to go to a finite depth of real accurate information to record history. We don't understand what the hell we're doing. Maybe we don't have techniques of recording, archaeology. We don't know how to grid a dig out, you feel me, right? So we go in and we start to record things. And let's just say what we record is pretty benign at first. Oh, well, there's these people down here and they created these freaking pyramids and it's pretty cool. Now, the second we start to usurp and upstage the accomplishments of an insecure group of non-blacks, whether they be Arab or Anglo-Saxon of any kind, we then get this defense mechanism of, oh my God, those people are going to, they sit there and they're thinking, well, geez, we're not as special as we thought we were. In fact, these people are all dead down there, and look at what they left behind. They left behind something far greater than us. Okay. So then they say, well, I don't want to wake up feeling bad about myself. I don't want our kids to feel bad about ourselves, right? And so we're going to go down and we're going to revise this history, or we're going to deny the history, or whatever. And we know that Europe went down and essentially wrote the history of Egypt. That's what happened. And I am aware of the conspiracy theories that it was all built in the 1850s. I just think that's logistically very shallow. But I'm waiting for more proof on that one. Just because a bunch of people drew crappy drawings of the pyramids, and just because they were under sand for a really long time and invisible doesn't mean they were built. Right? Sometimes people just don't give a crap about something until they give a crap about something, and so no one goes down and records anything before they realize it matters. But there's this fascinating idea that man has been super duper brilliant a long time ago, like really brilliant. And we don't have skyscrapers from visibly from 10, 20,000 years ago. We don't, but we have stone scrapers, pyramids, tons of them around the world. And I won't go into it too much because I keep saying this all the time. And I'm listening to my stuff back and I realize I repeat myself a lot about certain theories that I feel like I need to pound in everyone's brain. So I'm trying to cut down on that regiment. But I want to press upon you potentially that this is going to sound crazy, and this show is full of a lot of idealistic thoughts, but I believe that idealism is a frequency within consciousness that we have been convinced to get rid of. And I've seen idealism in kids, and I've tried to maintain it in them as much as possible, but there are points where kids just need to wake up. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe kids can marry the first person they meet. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. But now here's my idealism for this particular episode. Maybe I should make an idealism checkpoint in all the episodes. The idea is the following. If someone can start history wrong, then I believe that puts a kernel in all who have heard that misdirection. And that's probably going to sound a little esoteric, so let me define it. The reason why when you go to court and you have to, you have your freedom on hold until a jury frees you and determines whether or not you're guilty or not guilty. The reason why we form juries, one, out of your peers, but two, out of people that haven't heard what you are being accused of, is so they don't come in with obviously bias, right? You guys totally get that. I believe that any precursor to history, precursor to recording history, that exists at the moment someone joins the camp. It is sort of this, almost like a bump. Like you were going to race the race and you were going to use your own motor mechanics and you were going to look at the course, look at its terrain, look at its turns, look at your opponents, look at the vehicle or the apparatus you're using to complete the race, and you're going to start off and run that race the very best you possibly can, taking in data constantly, remodulating the positives and negatives. This is making me run faster. This is not making me run faster. But a bias in that moment is someone going bump, right when the race starts, just pushing you. And you're now off. You're now compensating for random occurrence and chaos that is unrelated to the race. Right? It doesn't have anything to do with the race. That is a jerk trying to stop you from racing accurately, right? Or it's just a mistake. So with history, And with the super advanced theories that we have now, where carbon dating came in and it was the unified theory of how to, date something, and then we realized, well, maybe not, right? And there's all these contingencies that can make it inaccurate. And if you have any questions about that, I guess you could say, search on carbon dating and then false dating, or false. And you could read all these wild theories. There's a lot of issues that can get in the mix to throw things off between biological and inert matter. It's a neat idea. I think for us, when something occurred is sort of the frosting on the cake. I mean, the exact years and that kind of stuff. I think that's all frosting on the cake. Hey, if you figure that out, that's awesome. What I really want to know is what happened and what order it happened in. I don't really care about what year it happened. If I told you that one of your relatives was a great male, a great female, something amazing, whatever matters to you, do you really give a shit if that person existed 80 years ago versus 8,000 years ago? I mean, maybe if you're splitting hairs of genetics, you might care about how much you're diluted from that moment, but what do you care whether it's 200 or 400 years ago? The idea is that that's who you're related to in some way, shape, or form. That's what's important. So my idealistic vision right now, my suggestion in this episode is to say, I think we need to start over. I think we need to start over completely, recording the history of man. And I think that we need to have the courage, all right, to not bring in the bias of religious indoctrination. Leave Jesus out of the picture, okay? If it's a mythical character that cannot be proven in any way, shape, or form, and forget the insinuated existence of someone, then you got to leave it behind. Just do me that favor, right? You could find his bones and prove it's him, then I give it to you 100%. Otherwise, let it go. Because we're trying to really find out what we are. And I don't think there's anything less divine than finding out who we are. If that interests you, right? Now, this episode's about the origins of man. I want to go through some theories. And I'm not getting into creationism and God creating the world in 7 days and all that ridiculousness. And some of you will be horrified that I said it was ridiculous, but maybe this isn't your channel. That's all I got to say. Because I'm never going to go the other way. I'm just not. I don't feel like I got the answer because I don't believe that. I just feel like at that point you're sort of cutting your feet off and then saying, hey, let's go on a big trip. Let's figure out where we're from, Or let's try to get a grasp on reality, right? It hobbles your ability to grasp reality. You live in fictitious tooth fairy stories, right? Science doesn't have the answer either, so don't think I'm going to the other side. I think that there's a beautiful consciousness that's in the middle. But I want to talk about the one that is talked about a lot, and it's sort of one of these things that you can't prove, although people are trying. You could essentially suggest several models for it, which is that we're living in a computer simulation. And I said this a really long time ago. I can't even remember what episode, but since we're on this, it's gaining steam, slightly. I wanted to mention it. Now, it's sort of a silly idea and it's sort of a fine idea, which is that computer simulation. What I think is funny about people saying that the computer simulation is that somehow that answers the question. Oh, we're a computer simulation? Oh, well, you found the little microscopic handles in memory that attach to every atom, and oh yeah, well, that totally makes sense, right? Yeah, we're totally in a computer simulation. Okay, let's say you found the proof, right? You found the made in China label somewhere stuck deep in the universe, and we're in some supercomputer. Fine. That is our relative creation point. Okay. Well, where did the computer come from? Who programmed it? What's running the computer? Am I in solid state memory? Am I in liquid memory? Like, what am I? Like, we're not answering anything. We're just giving a weird constructional metaphor on top of existence. And so I mentioned that because, I said I wasn't going to go back too far, to existential beginning stuff, because the origin of man is really about, at some point we did exist on this planet as a new being, whether we evolved or we were spliced together or divinely laid down here. But I think that the one thing that's interesting about this flat earth theory that's going around like crazy is that people are willing to believe a completely different model of reality. It's amazing. They're willing to believe that we're in a firmament-covered dome, living on a disk, surrounded by ice, and I think that's great. I think that's great that people are willing to consider it. I'm still not convinced at all, right? I'm not convinced. I went and did some math, and I am brewing up a Flat Earth 2 episode, but I went and brewed up some math for curvature of Earth and being able to see it, and the data's coming in pretty clearly, and I'll give hardcore examples in the episode that's coming up here, but when you go up into a plane, you can't register the curvature of the Earth for very specific scientific reasons. And I've not asked someone to tell me this. I went and did my own math of viewable miles at 30,000 feet, calculating the curvature for those miles out, and then illustrating that in a vanishing point time and a horizon. And yes, you will not see. There is curvature right in front of your face, but you just couldn't possibly conceive of it. Maybe if you had super duper scientific instruments on a day that is absolutely clear, and you flew a plane up and somehow, or released a balloon in the middle of the ocean or something, you might be able to maybe register it. But then it would be so minute that when you really registered the curvature of the Earth at 30,000 feet using a balloon and a camera that's not got a fisheye lens, people would contest. It'd probably be a fraction of a pixel on a 5K monitor. That's how non-curved it is because it's so big, right? Anyway, I don't want to get off on that. But there was an interesting episode. I'm rewatching Star Trek Voyager, and there was an episode called Displaced. And it is an amazing episode for people who are into Flat Earth. If you haven't seen it, just go on to Netflix. I think it's 4th season Voyager. It's called Displaced. And it's about a brilliant idea. The script idea is really just simple, but utterly brilliant when you really think about it, which is a crew member. They don't know it at first, but this guy just appears in the middle of the hallways inside the disc section, right? And there's a couple Star Trek people there, and they're like, whoa, this person just showed up, and he's, oh, where am I? I don't know where I am. And they take him to safety and talk to him. He's like, I was walking down the street in my neighborhood, and I all of a sudden appear in your ship. I don't know what's going on. I'm afraid. By the way, it's too cold for me here, and it's too bright for me here. And so one by one, these people start showing up in the Voyager. And they eventually realize that for everyone that comes in, one of the individuals gets pulled out, who's a normal Voyager human occupant, right? Well, it starts getting alarmingly fast, like 9.5 minutes between these teleports, and eventually Janeway realizes, oh my God, in 18 hours, our whole ship will be taken over by these people that don't know how to fly a ship, and I don't know where the hell we're going, but this is scary, because we need to get home. Now, where they end up going, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but come on, this show's 20 years old. They find themselves in sort of an agrodome. And if you listen to Tuvok, the Black Vulcan guy, he's an amazing actor, when you listen to his dialogue about how he has assessed the dome, he is essentially asserting pretty much everything that's been asserted into this flat Earth theory, which is that they have made a disc-shaped world, which is a dome, and there are natural obstructions to trying to escape. So there's a fallen tree, there's a cliff. He talks about the whole thing where they're kind of stuck on this mini continent. Now, it's nothing like the size of Earth by any stretch. I don't think. Eventually, everyone gets sucked over to this other world, and then they have to find a way to escape. There's a guy who shows up in their world. So you have a whole dome that's dedicated to the Voyager people, humans, right? They're visited briefly by the people who are stealing them. The whole thing's been intentional. This is how they take over ships and steal arsenal to fight a war that they're fighting. Anyway, but this alien shows up in their dome, and he says, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" And they're like, "Ooh, who are you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm next door. I'm your neighbor. I'm in the other dome next door where my people are being stored." And he goes, "It took me 8 years to find the door, and I figured out a method to get between the next dome over." And so they end up making friends with that guy, and they use his technique to get out. It ends happily, right? But what's interesting about that to me is it's a nice fictional story. One, I just think it's a brilliant idea for taking over a ship, is to pretend like you're teleporting randomly to someone else's world. But here you have a fictitious story writer, right? Or a real story writer is writing a fictitious story, talking about how there could be these agrodomes that are so big that man could not know that man was inside of a petri dish of sorts, right? So I think that's fascinating. And it sort of like goes, you can throw on top of that, okay, it's a computer simulation. Who cares if it's a computer simulation? Really? That's just like arguing the fabric of the universe. You know, I'm not telling you not to study it, not to figure it all out, by all means, right? Maybe you can find the God subroutine and really mess up the universe. It would appear that whatever this place is, it is the most bug-tested software on planet Earth. I mean, bug-tested software in existence, right? We don't have glitches in the system, unless you want to count the Mandela effect. By the way, we had some amazing follow-up comments in the Mandela effect comments. If you missed the Mandela effect episode, it's really doing actually quite well. Get into the comments, man. You've got people. I tell you, the one that really struck me. There's a couple that struck me, but a guy who said he grew up. I believe it's a he. He grew up in Australia, believing that New Zealand was to the west, when it's actually to the east. I think that's the way I got it right? Yeah, it's over to the east. But he grew up thinking it was to the west. And that's where I grew up thinking it was. I mean, I've said this a couple times. I don't like to say it too much, but when it comes to images, I have a photographic memory for anything I'm interested in, especially maps. When I see a map, I burn it. It's unbelievable how, like, for instance, I wouldn't be able to take Africa right now and name all the countries or anything like that. But if I was going to Africa, and I think I'm going to go down the Nile and then hike back up and do all this stuff and catch some crazy disease that the Gates family's given them, I would study it. I'd study all the roads and the major highways, and I'd know it. I'd know it for as long as I need to know it until I don't need to know it, and I'd flush it, right? But he said, look, I grew up here my whole life, and he goes, New Zealand was always off to the west, to the left, and now it's on to the bottom right. That's heavy, man. That's heavy. And you guys could say, oh, that guy's not very smart or whatever. It's like, no, I don't think so, man. A lot of people remember it the other way. It's really, really wild. And there's a couple other ones I'd have to stop and look it up right now, but get into the Mandela effect thing. It's pretty cool. But we don't have glitches like our parents disappearing, right? We don't have glitches like our top half is over there and our bottom half is over there and we just bleed out in 2 seconds, right? We don't have any of those problems. This is amazing, whatever the hell's going on here. And regardless if you think of it as bits in memory and it's a computer simulation, forget all that crap. This is reality. And really, in a computer, it's real too, right? So World of Warcraft is a real game. It's real copies of us in a game with non-player characters playing and monsters and all this other stuff. It's real. It's really in memory. It's not a simulation. It's real. That's what it really is, right? So this is our real thing, but we use various forms of energy to make our world, right? And our consciousness. Now, what's interesting about the origins of man is that we have history buried all over this world. And we have human beings that refuse to allow us to look underneath the soil. What am I talking about? Well, most of Egypt is still buried. Most of the temples are still buried. And the country of Egypt will not allow it to be excavated. Not under any means that we can come up with, where whether we double, triple, and quadruple the softness of how we actually, remove soil. If we just had a God fan and blew it all away, they won't let us dig it. And I want you to dig it. Can you dig it? China's got massive pyramids under soil. They won't allow anyone to excavate. They won't allow us to know what they did to build the thing, whether or not it's rice paddies built up. Some of you may not know that the Wall of China has the center core of the Wall of China is rice. And they put the facade on the outside, which is stone. Brilliant idea. Stuff as hard as a rock. Don't think it's not amazing. There are pyramids in South America, next to Aztec pyramids. They're as big as mountains. Man-made. They've got excavation points that the citizens have dug up over the years. And so, like I said, one of my producers was down there, and he said that his guide said, the biggest pyramids haven't been dug up yet. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, you're on one right now. And so he traveled around. He's been going down there. I think he goes down once a month. He's got his pilot's license. He lives for that stuff. It's fantastic. I think he married a woman from down there recently. So, why? Japan has a bunch of stuff as well. Why aren't we allowed to dig up history? Does that make any sense? There's a lot of talk, and I haven't talked about it yet, but a lot of you have done the research of the giant humans here on North America. There's a really famous tall man that went through, I think, the the circuses back in the day, in the 30s and 40s. My grandmother actually met him. He came through my hometown, and a friend of mine just got her picture taken standing in front of a painting of him and how massive he was. I think he was like 8'2" or something like that, or maybe 9'2". He was really crazy large, right? This girl is 5'8", and I think his hip bone was right about her ear, right? Huge. But we know now, unless it's revised disinformation history, but people have books that were printed in the 1800s, people. Smithsonian books, like before you had the encyclopedia, you could get journals printed from these organizations, pay for them, and they'd send them to you, and you'd have a book, and you just add it to your library, right? People have these books that talk about the Smithsonian, European Smithsonian people coming over and excavating thousands of human beings with double row teeth, right? I had friends of mine with double row teeth when I was a kid, which is a holdover from this weird sort of giant Homo sapien. It's not a hominid, although people try to talk about hominids being in this too, but they have human beings that are like a minimum of 9 feet, some as tall as 25 feet, as recorded by these scientists. And this was all during the 1800s. The Native Americans were they were the predecessors to us, and a lot of the artifacts you find built here were built by them. Well, imagine that creature participates in actually creating the pyramids. 20-foot person with much thicker bones, much thicker flesh, much more intense muscle structure. Maybe carrying a rock is not a big deal. Now, the other one is that the statues are massive of these people. And so if you're 25 foot tall to begin with and you erect a statue to yourself, you're going to make it bigger than yourself. But we created, Abraham Lincoln, and we make him bigger than us as we stand next to him. But if you were 25 feet, Abraham Lincoln, I believe, is about 25 feet sitting in that chair. Right, he may be bigger. Hell, I don't know. Who the hell measures that shit? But I'm sure his statue would be a hell of a lot larger to make him grand, right? The Kim Jong family of North Korea, hate them all you want, but man, they make a brass statue that is unbelievable, right? So there are 3, or at least the 2 fathers. I think there may be 3 now. They have these statues of them, and they're just the most gorgeous things I've ever seen. But they build them bigger because they're smaller. But if you take a North Korean guy and you make him 25 feet tall, those statues are going to be 100 feet tall. You feel me, right? I do realize sometimes I belabor issues a little too much on the show. The way I form a thought is I create a picture in my brain and I walk down the picture. And so if I go too long, it's because I'm walking down the picture and I feel like I got to talk about the entire picture that I see. There's this amazing movement in Egypt by, consequently, some British people, but some New York people, some Europeans, and they are reobserving all of Egypt. And I have a whole ancient Egypt episode that talks about this. So if you want that episode, just search on Egypt within the channel. But the cool thing about it is they're reimagining the history of Egypt. And that's what I'm suggesting here, is that we reimagine the history of mankind. And, maybe it's overlap with other species. There's this assertion that dinosaurs are fake. And I think it's interesting, when someone says something like that, dinosaurs are fake, 99% of the entire population who hears that comment has this knee-jerk kind of throw-up feeling that's like, oh, come on. And it's probably for two reasons. One, we believe we've seen unbelievable, irrefutable evidence of dinosaurs. I believe they're real. And I'm not saying that to make sure you don't think I'm crazy. I just think the logistics of creating dinosaur bones is crazy. I'm going to do maybe an episode on dinosaurs and go over that theory because I have some ideas to split the atom on that. But, I feel like there's usually a scientific body that is wrapped around discovery. And I believe that when that scientific body is limited, meaning we don't have other disciplines that are allowed in. Like, what if I said, in order to be allowed to dig up an Egyptian artifact, you have to have studied Egyptology at these 5 universities, one of these 5 universities. You have to have taken tons of tests and pre-indoctrination stuff from the Egyptian government. So I've essentially done what Rod Serling said in the late 50s, which is that I have pre-censored your brain to filter everything that you find. And so no matter what you dig up, you're within these limited left brain confines of what I believe you're willing to say you've discovered in the first place. Instead of what these Egyptian, the Pyramid Code people do, I believe that's what there's a documentary on Netflix called Pyramid Code, but there's a much better one, a really long one on the YouTubes. But when we reimagine this, I think what we have to do is say, instead of bringing all these puffed up CERN Hadron Collider ultra biased PhDs in that can only see everything through the Big Bang. All right, I'm just going to say a dirty word. Fuck those guys. Fuck those guys. Bring your 5-year-old. Bring your teenager. Bring your grandmother. Bring your friends. Bring everybody. And let's revise history. And let's all just observe it. Let's try not to create, again, crazy fiction that's literally just out of your brain because you were inspired. If you get inspired by history, by something that, A is what really happened, but you're feeling B, then go turn B into a book. Go turn B into a movie. Have some fun. Make a B movie. You didn't know you were coming for that kind of reveal, did you? But the idea is, I think we just need to start from scratch. And I don't think when I say don't bring religion into the situation, what I'm telling you is it doesn't need to be there. It absolutely doesn't need to be there. Now, this flat earth thing being catalyzed by Christianity is so sad. There's the scene, and if you've been a devout listener of the show and Kyle and I's show, you'll know I've said this a couple times, but there's the old scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Richard Dreyfuss sees a UFO and he eventually wiggles his way into a briefing at an Air Force base, and he just wants to know what happened because something happened. The side of his face got burned and he saw cones, and he's just been almost like imprinted with this shape that's very important to him, right? This guy shows up, This old man shows up who you see, he's whistling when the little boy almost gets hit by Richard Dreyfuss in his utility vehicle. This old man shows up to the same meeting, and they're just about to hear what the Air Force is going to tell them, which is a load of complete bullshit. And the old man says a line about Bigfoot. He says, I'll tell you what, I saw Bigfoot, and he had a foot this long. He takes a salt shaker and throws it down the table, and I think that's what it was. And he goes, he made a howl I would not want to hear 2 times, or twice or whatever. And Richard Dreyfuss, you just see his face go, God damn it. I'm trying to get real evidence, and I got a fucking crazy guy in the room with me. It's probably one of the most brilliant little tiny facial inflections of Richard Dreyfuss in any movie, of any writing, in any film ever. It was fantastic. I think that's what we do when we bring in this crazy, like just molasses thick, pedophilia-ridden Christianity into the conversation. It's like, hey, we're trying to figure out the history of man. Take that completely unrelated circus of yours and keep it out, at least during this conversation, right? Hey, as long as you become a good person, I'm not going to bust your balls about what you believe. Just be a good person. If you have any kids, teach them morals, teach them respect for humanity, teach them respect for different beliefs, especially the ones that are different than yours. And let's move from there. So anyway, as I promised at the beginning of this was going to be loose. This was going to be just more of sort of a mind-prodding lecture. Those of you who've really delved into this deeply, you might be disappointed I didn't get to a lot of specific examples about things. What I will end up doing, and again, if you want to hear about a lot of the origin of man in an evolutionary standpoint with alien splicing and that kind of thing, if that's what you dig, go to episode 2, because that's where all that is. And that was the one I need to throw out to Jared for mentioning I should go do. I want to congratulate our listener Lori, who has put together a cool little channel. In fact, let me get her channel name here. All right, here you go. Her name's Lori Gale, Lorigale. She just started a YouTube channel, and she is being very courageous with her beliefs and with the process of realizing that people don't believe what she believes. But she cannot deny, I think, what I said at the very beginning of this episode, which is when you have a thought of truth run through you, you have bliss run through you. And I think that's almost, it's the gift from God. It's the gift from whatever the ultimate consciousness is of this universe, whether we be the creators or someone individually is the creators. I think it makes more sense that we're the creators, to be honest. That's what feels good when I think that through me. But you can converse with the rest of the universe by saying God. No problem with that at all. No problem with anything. But anyway, yeah, check her out. G-A-L-E. Lorigale. Move some listeners. And she's not creating a ton of stuff, but she's just, you can feel what she's going through and sympathize. She's got more views on her videos than I do. In some cases, it's she really struck a chord. So congratulations. I think you're on the right track. If you guys have not been already, go to mkultureradio.com. That was the name of our original show. We're probably going to do this, turn that into a sort of a radio channel. I don't know a lot of people that do this that don't have their own YouTube channels, but I'd like to aggregate perhaps on our website some stuff. But we have a fairly strict charter on the show, which is no fear-mongering, no hopelessness. Try not to be, we don't believe in any political parties or religious parties. So we talk about them, but we don't side with them as a pure, doctrine to exist, right? But we took the website and split it in half. And so there is now a, Deep Thoughts side, which is not a hell of a lot of content. It's just basically how to get to the YouTube channel if you're on podcast if you're on YouTube, and the Facebook pages. There's just 2 different Facebook pages. A lot of stuff going on right now. Again, Kyle and I are both too far apart to really record right now easily, so that might change. But right now, that's where we are. It'll just randomly occur. Apologize, because I do believe there's a lot of incredibly important political information to listen to. That show is completely different than this show. So do not expect to have the quiet storm over there. It'll be a storm, all right, but it'll be very loud. All right, guys, if you made it this far, always appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed and you dig this kind of stuff, please subscribe. If you like this particular video, please give me a thumbs up. Again, all that does is that really helps other people find the video. It kind of gives it this trending algorithm when people search on things within YouTube. I'm hoping that after I hit 100 episodes on this, that something can happen. I'm not sure I'm going to go beyond 100. I think 100 might be a really cool end point for this show. It doesn't mean I won't create a new show with a different spin, but I don't know. We'll see. I may create 1,000 of these things. I don't know. If everyone digs it, then I'll get into it, but I might change up the format a little bit and call it something different. Again, I'm not making short videos in this particular show because I think what we've done is we've aggregated people together with an intellect level that 99.9% you guys are utterly respectful for each other, to each other. And I think that if I was creating 5-minute videos, I would just drag in the group of people that we don't want. And it was nothing wrong with them. I just think they'd be really knee-jerky and perhaps trolly. So anyhow, I really appreciate you guys because I can just see your integrity every split second of the day. Anyway, hope you dug it. Take care of yourself and somebody else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.